Welcome back to The Conservative. Hi there, I'm Mike Lannon, your host, and this is PEGTV, and this is the government channel where the conservative speaks to you from a conservative viewpoint. And today I'm going to wrap up the last two or three shows by talking about political sleep. And political sleep is what happens when the veil of ignorance comes down upon us and we have no clue what's going on, and we are going to, as the frog in the water, lose our rights. So Thomas Paine once said, who was a great author of freedom and freedom's exercises during the American Revolution, he said, "Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it," meaning that if you're not there and supporting it, you will lose those freedoms. So I'm going to try to wrap up those three last shows. I will hypnotize Vermonters into the deepest of sleeps from which they will not awaken. And listen to me, my children, and you shall hear of legislative actions from which we will disappear. So in 1972, a Playboy magazine article asked for all those interested in changing a free, independently conservative, and self-reliant culture to come live in Vermont. The implication was that for all those interested in creating a communal society could come to the Green Mountains and easily create an all-for-one and one-for-all utopian society. With this call to action, of course, the progressive movement from the late 1960s brought an anti-religious value system to the mountains and the valleys of our state. People, many with trust funds and other sources of income, migrated from the east, the south, and the west. They packed up their belongings and brought to Vermont's farmlands an uncontested way of progressive living. Nearly 50 years later, most of Vermonters have sold their birthrights and left the homeland. Unabated, the economic exodus continues today, and you've heard me say more and more that the fastest exiting population in Vermont is 45 and under. 55,000 fewer children going to school in this state than there were 10 years ago, and yet the cost of education is higher than it's ever been. So no one seems to have understood Paine's warning of the fatiguing strength needed to support a free Vermont. Impatient Vermonters who have stayed in their state have wearily abandoned their God-given rights for the disadvantages of dependent entitlements. In Vermont's public squares, the newbies immediately placed Vermont's small communities and places of worship under attack. One message was that going to church was truly the sign of an oppressed person, not necessary. Vermont families have succumbed to all kinds of Sunday activities, which have been designed for the glory of our youth and the vicarious experiences of their parents. The spiritual life has become unimportant, and right is now wrong, and wrong is right. Further, as people continue to believe the carefully worded and politically correct rhetoric of the collective, they stay at home on Sunday. The values taught by the long-established but now outdated Judeo-Christian ethic are considered nonsense and can be gained through Vermont's legislative processes and a reformed educational system, both of which are complete failures. Government is alive and God is dead. While abolishing religion and watering down the importance of a quality education, the new Vermonters began actively to kill the trust in Vermont's traditional belief systems. The introduction of a modern system of religion in education has been deliberately designed to be slow and subtle. Yet, honest intellects, if such can be found, will state that the change in the progressive process of educating Vermont's youth has boldly taken shape. Gradually, the Vermont school system is teaching one political view, That view is the collectivism, is the political alternative to everyone's economic woes. The big picture is that Vermonters' unhappiness with a dependent, unearned and small income is a result of free enterprise gone amok and would disappear if we could only produce a social democracy where and it were to be implemented right. The need for our youth to receive and understand order and structure in the classroom has silently disappeared. Mid-level classroom chaos and mediocrity has overrun a once improving academic achievement environment. While Vermont youth play Sunday games, they continue to fall further and further behind the required demands associated with the ability of reading, writing, and arithmetic. We are told that we do not need to celebrate learning. All learners are equal. Everyone graduates as number one in the class. Today, if one shows up, everyone deserves a gold medal or a championship trophy. That all makes sense if you believe in socialism and have no knowledge, understanding, or wisdom for a better or more successful political system. However, this is the historical reality of socialism, the progressive left. A pseudo-religion grounded in pseudo-education and enforced by political tyranny. Even before 1972, the late Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, and you've heard me speak of him many times, from the old Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, predicted that he didn't expect the American people would jump from capitalism to communism in 10 or even 20 years, but that over time, the communists would assist United States elected leaders with injections of small concept doses of socialism until ignorant Americans would awaken one day to find that they had voted communism in as their constitutional form of government. Khrushchev laughed when he said that the communists need not ever invade the United States. His intent was to destroy us from within, and that he'd already started. Nikita Khrushchev was also the same individual who assisted Joseph Stalin to murder hundreds of thousands of political opponents in Russia. Your mob press doesn't even talk about him anymore. They don't even talk about the fact that socialism has associated with it the corruption and death of the political opponents. Vermont, like all American states, is a new government. Vermont is 226 years old. That is really, really new compared to the governments of the world that go back, as far as we can tell, with the written record, about 8,000 years. Beyond that, we know there are other civilizations. We can't read their writings. In the historical scheme of things, men and women have never been able to rule themselves. Socialistic utopias, such as Cuba and Venezuela, have failed miserably, but political elites continue to advocate for that form of government. Socialism, democratic or otherwise, is what was found in the Soviet Union, where Vermont's newbie, Senator Sanders, honeymooned. How fast we seem to forget the failed government of East Germany, North Korea, and Nicaragua. Those regimes have been the most brutal, impoverishing, bleak, and inhumane in history. We could easily name an additional 50 failed socialistic states, but in my time here at this television show, almost impossible to list them. But you know by the ones that I've just named how egregious it is to even think that we would want to go down that road to that kind of statehood. Vermont continues to travel toward socialism for today, tomorrow, and forever. The ruin of the Green Mountain State, voted in by uninformed populace. The ruination of the state of Vermont's once proud self-reliance and independent rights is the silent and hidden intent of the progressives. They want to organize an economic and cultural configuration that suppresses, if not eliminates, the market economy and the creation of the alienating and selfish culture it produces. Selfishly, the newbie government has replaced work boots with an inundation of production-stopping rules, regulations, policies, and procedures struck squarely upon Vermont's economic throat. Just stop and think about that. What have we got going on in Vermont that's really lasting? Bennington just lost 100 jobs. The battery company down there moves all of its jobs to Wisconsin. I just mentioned in the front end here the number of young people, 45 and under, that are leaving Vermont. Look up there in Burlington, where we supposedly have the greatest amount of our state economy. People are leaving in droves. No matter the indignation and persistent denials from the legislatures and uninformed body politic, Vermont's government is defined as a socialistic welfare state, which is being subsidized by a continually declining, sputtering, and non-taxable economy. Those who can pay a tax dollar are burdened with paying a higher and higher amount of money for an unsustainable government that has spending so far out of control that Vermonters can't afford the basic necessities for living their life. That is the plan offered by the left. The progressives want all Vermonters to be dependent on their form of governance. That is the definition of socialism. It is a political and economic theory of dependency. A social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchanges of wealth should be owned and regulated by the community as a whole. There is no place in that community for the entrepreneur, the innovator, the inventor. No one can own more than another. In all of the so-called socialistic experiments, to date and in the future, the desire to be innovative and entrepreneurial dies from a lack of improving monetary incentives. The competitive desire to improve oneself isn't necessary because someone from the government will provide for everybody's dependent needs. The Vermont legislature needs to recognize, and darn soon, that they must champion entrepreneurs, farming economies, and a free enterprise and compassionate capitalism, or not survive. There is no other way to fund Vermont's welfare programs. A socialist will never answer the question, who will pay for these programs? Instead, let's not pay attention to the intention of governing by men and women, but let's ruin the attempt with a for the people Vermont socialism experiment on steroids. One of the many ways to pay for these expensive steroids is to seize control of Vermont's energy sources, add a carbon tax on top of that, and thus eliminate poverty, provide free health care, which will be overseen by a government agency, perhaps transportation, and put in its place a state-run progressive education for all the people. Vermont is in overwhelmingly pension fund debt. With collapsing wages and appropriate wage earners exiting the state faster than a fleeing deer, this growing and unanswered debt load will swallow all future investment, innovation, and entrepreneurship. The history of the democratic socialistic experiment shows us that it will. Vermont will be no different than, let's say, a modern-day Greece. If we take a look at our Vermont legislators, like any other socialistic regime, those in control of the government live well, with no fiscal concerns. Meanwhile, these Vermont legislators, with nothing better to do, write laws that take wealth from the working class and redistribute the same by giving a lot of things away for free. In addition, they write earned dollars to folks who receive Vermont pensions, paychecks, or welfare benefits. Because Vermont has walked away from a Judeo-Christian value structure, we are now seeing man-made outcomes, which are causing death and misery. We resort to drugs, including alcoholism, suicide, sex abuse, and other perversions, and call ourselves happy and informed intellectually. We have an upside-down view of our woes and expect to ask the remaining collective few to spend a fortune helping people overcome their addictions. Hey, if you want to really champion higher taxes and a more generous social welfare system, then we need to continue associating ourselves with Vermont's current philosophy of destitution and death. There is no other way to call it than what it is: ignorant and unconscious socialism. I shall conclude these quick remarks as I opened. Here's John Adams warning us from 1776. Among the warning voices of the founders, none was more forceful in proclaiming the need for virtuous people to make the Constitution function than John Adams. He said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." We also have a young judge from France that deeply warned us of us sleeping deeply. He was Alex de Tocqueville. He wrote a 2-volume work entitled Democracy in America. De Tocqueville saw the people of the United States passing through several distinct stages. First of all, he saw the strength of character and moral integrity that would make them prosperous. But as they became self-sufficient, he saw that they would be less concerned about each other and much less concerned about the principles that made them a great people. This would leave them vulnerable to the manipulation of clever politicians who would begin to promise them perpetual security if they accepted certain schemes contrived by some of their leaders. He then described what modern students have been led to identify as democratic socialism. I finished this quick work that I have basically been telling you about today with a flourish of Tocqueville's thinking and belief about democratic socialism. That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood. But it seeks on the contrary to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that the people should rejoice, provided they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and the only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains to spare them all the care of thinking and the trouble of living? After having thus successfully taken each member of the community in its powerful grasp and fashioned them at will, the supreme power then extends its arm over the whole community. It covers the surface of society with a network of small, complicated rules, minute and uniform, through which the most original minds and the most energetic characters cannot penetrate to rise above the crowd. The will of man is not shattered, but softened, bent, and guided. Men are seldom forced by it to act, but they are constantly restrained from acting. Such a power does not destroy, but it prevents existence. It does not tyrannize, but it compresses, innervates, extinguishes, and stupefies a people, till the nation is reduced to nothing better than a flock of timid and industrial animals of which the government is the shepherd. Wake up, Vermont. Wake up or sleep forever. And so, with about 9 minutes to go with this show, I just want to quickly reiterate what I've said now for the last 4 shows. We are in trouble. And those of you that sit on your couch week after week, or this is the first time you've ever watched this show and don't understand the fact that we cannot continue to go down the road of the left. And we're about to find out in the 2020 election that Donald Trump, who is a iconoclast in the thinking that he is down there to drain the swamp, is going to pick up more votes than anybody has ever thought. All I had to do was watch the parade in Rutland the other night and see someone that was riding on the floats dressed as Donald Trump, and the cheers in the crowd. Yes, there were people that were booing, but the majority of people were cheering, which tells me even in Rutland, little old Vermont that's turning as quickly as we can think of it into a socialistic state, has got a lot of people that are interested in what Donald Trump is doing as President of the United States. We cannot afford to have in our city government, in our state government, in our government in Washington, D.C., men and women who believe in a socialistic state, men and women who cannot define the way in which we shall survive as a non-free enterprise, non-capitalistic, non-individual nation, where everything will be done in the collective. And as I've just spoken, I still believe that you out there are the frogs in the pan, and you're allowing the water to warm up. And once that water gets so warm, like the frog in the pan, you will not be able to jump out of that hot water, and you will be boiled to death. And that is what's happening. We are slowly, as Khrushchev said we would have happen, we are slowly but surely being boiled to death. We do not realize what is happening. And the majority of Americans do not do as Thomas Paine suggested, which is to absolutely, under no circumstances, become an American who does not, under any circumstances, understand that those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it. We have got to rise up. Now, in this next election, there's going to be, I believe, a primary in the Republican Party. It looks like it's shaping that way. If there is, take a look at the person that dares to run against Mr. Phil Scott. Mr. Phil Scott has not gone down the road of the conservative principles of the state. He's allowing himself to be drawn in for political reasons to the left. He is no longer in the middle. He's very much to the left. Take a look at what he's voted for. Look at what he has not vetoed. And if you are a conservative like myself, you wish to give up your guns, you wish to throw away the Second Amendment, you wish to have a constitutional amendment that looks to life as not important, and that life at the end of the tri-semester, the second semester, or the first semester, wherever it be, that it's okay that we change our Constitution and we make life okay to be eliminated and aborted. That's what he's going to vote for. That's what he's going to place in there. And look, don't get sucked in to the left's belief that we have no desire, the Judeo-Christian principles. Most people don't realize. Read the book of Daniel. Those of you that still have a Bible in your home, find out what Jesus was talking about when he told the disciples And they asked the question, how do we know about ending times? And he said, know about the book of Daniel. Read the book of Daniel to find out the abomination. When the abomination approaches, you know that the ending time is here. Well, the abomination, in my opinion, in the book of Daniel is the violation of God's tenets by the religion called Baal. And Baal's religion, which is in the time of Daniel, was the killing of the firstborns, the killing of the innocents, infanticide. And for years, throughout all of cultures, the Mayans, the American Indians, the Chinese to this day, putting the female children or the male children out on the highlands and not allowing highlands for them to just freeze to death. Putting children, having a state rule that says you can have only one child. All those kind of rules all the way through the world have been around for 8,000 years. We know that because we have the written record of religions that have forbidden that. Along comes the Judeo-Christian principle and says, no, we're not going to do that anymore. No more of that. No more. It is against God's rule of law. And we can no longer be understanding of God's rule of law and expect to somehow that we have an ethics, morality that's more superior. Next time I may come in and talk about that particular part of that triangle that I often talk to you about. The three-sided equilateral triangle that Aristotle and Plato, Pythagoras, Euclid, some of the great minds of the past, way past, talked about. Jesus also talked about it. The mind, the soul, and the heart. Aristotle and those guys talked about the fact that we had a spiritual side. That was the base of the triangle. The base held up the other two legs. The left leg was the intellectual side. The right leg was the physical side. Any one of those sides not balanced, not maintained, not developed, with no knowledge that would lead to understanding, that would lead to wisdom, that triangle would collapse in on itself. If the base falls, the other two legs fall down. If the left leg intellectual side falls, the other two legs collapse on each other. If the physical side falls down, such as an obese nation, then the other two sides collapse. This is how we're being sucked in by the left. We're watering down education. We've decided that there's no need for a spiritual life guided by the Judeo-Christian principles, and we're allowing a nation to become fat, lazy, and slothful. It's the way it is. Take a look at those three things. All three pieces of our triangle are beginning to collapse. Oh, woe is me, woe is me. I've had people look at me and say, you think so negative, Mike. I don't think negative. I don't think negative at all. In my own personal life, I have a physical fitness program. 5 miles a day I run. I have an intellectual program. I read 52 books a year. I have a spiritual program. I go to church, I attend church, and I read the Bible. Those are the three tenets that have come and been passed down to us by Jesus, by Aristotle, by Plato, by Pythagoras. You go down through the list of all the great thinkers. Einstein, name them. Name the people you think are great in your mind and go read their biography, see what they believed. And you will find out that they believed in the triangle. They believed in the spiritual side of things, they believed in the intellectual side of things, they believed in the physical side of things. And all of the men that I've just named, every single one of them, was involved in a balanced way with all three. All three were balanced. You cannot be unbalanced and expect somehow that your triangle is going to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. Oh, that would be Ben Franklin, who talked indeed at great length about the triangle. So those of you that don't believe all that, you can go look at it. You've heard me say it a million half times. Discernment. Don't just listen to what I'm saying. Go look these things up. Study. Do as Payne said. Make sure that you take and undergo the fatigues of supporting your government. Do not be the frog in the pan and continue to allow yourself to be boiled. And that's what's happening. And I don't care if there's only one person watching this show and has gotten the message, or there's a million of you out there, which is a big number. But you guys have got to do the thinking. One person sitting at this show cannot make the change. Every one of us has got to stand up, go outside the doorway of our homes and say to the rest of the world, enough is enough. We need to change ourselves back to that self-reliant, conservative Vermont. See you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye now.